Hi, class. Okay, so we're ready for chapter 28, and he knew where he was. The new puppy knew where he was. So let's see. Where was he? Sorry about the different angle. I'm charging my phone. Okay, a long, long time ago, I stood on the banks of this very river, perhaps on this very spot, when Ethan and I had gone for our long walk after Flair, the dumb horse, abandoned us. The scent was unmistakable. Doing fine all those years had taught me how to separate out odors, characterize and store them in memory, so that now I could instantly remember this place. It helped that it was summer, the same time of year, and that I was young and my nose was so sharp. I couldn't possibly fathom how Victor might have known this or what it meant that he had released me so that I would find the place. I had no sense as to what he wanted me to do. Lacking any better idea, I turned downstream and started trotting, retracing the very same steps Ethan and I had taken those many years ago. By the end of the day, I was hungrier than I could remember ever being, so hungry my stomach cramped. Wistfully, I thought of the old woman's pale hand poking through the fence and dropping little pieces of meat for me to snatch out of mid-air. The memory made me drool. The riverbank was choked with vegetation and made for slow going, and it seemed that the hungrier I became, the less certain I was of my course of action. Was this really what I should do? Follow this stream? Why? I was a dog who had learned to live among and serve humans as my sole purpose in life. Now cut off from them, I was adrift, had no purpose, no destiny, no hope. Anyone spotting me slinking along the shores at that moment might mistake me for my timid, furtive first mother. That's how far back Victor's abandonment had thrown me. A giant tree that had snapped during the winter and fallen by the water formed a natural hollow on the bank, and as the sun faded from the sky, I climbed into this dark place, sore and exhausted and completely puzzled by the changes in my life. My hunger woke me the next morning, but lifting my nose into the air brought me nothing but the smells of the river and the surrounding forest. I followed the flow of water downstream because I had nothing better to do. But I was moving more slowly than the day before, hobbled by the empty ache in my belly. I thought of the dead fish that sometimes washed up at the pond. Why had I merely rolled in them? Why hadn't I eaten them when I had the chance? Dead fish now would be heavenly, but the river yielded nothing edible. So miserable was I that when the rough bank gave way to a footpath, redolent with the scent of humans, I hardly noticed. I ambled lethargically along, only halting when the path rose steeply and joined a road. The road led to a bridge over the river. I raised my head, the fog lifting from my mind. Sniffing excitedly, I realized I had been here before. Ethan and I had been picked up by a policeman on this very spot and taken for a car ride back to the farm. Many years had obviously passed. Some small trees I remembered marking at one end of the bridge had grown to be towering giants, so I marked them again. And the rotting planks of the bridge had been replaced, but otherwise the smells were exactly the same as I remembered. An automobile rattled by as I stood on the bridge. It honked at me and I flinched back from it. After a minute, though, I hesitantly followed it, abandoning the river for the road ahead. I had no idea where to go now, but something told me that if I went in this direction, I'd eventually arrive in town. Where there was a town, there were people, and where there were people, there was food. When the road joined another, the same inner sense told me to turn right, and so I did. Though I shrank guiltily away when I sensed a car coming, sliding into the high grasses, I felt like a bad dog, and my hunger only enforced this belief. I passed many houses, most of them set far back from the road, and often dogs would bark at me, upset by my trespass. Around nightfall, I was slinking past a place with a dog smell when the side door opened and a man stepped out. "Dinner, Leo. Want dinner?" he asked, his voice carrying that deliberate excitement people use when they want to make sure a dog knows something good is happening. A metal bowl was dropped on the loud clang of the top step of a short series of stairs. The word dinner arrested me in my tracks. I stood riveted as a squat dog with enormous jaws and a thick body eased down the steps and did his business a few feet into the yard. The way he moved suggested he was an old dog, and he didn't smell me. He went back and nosed around in his bowl a little, then reached up and scratched the door. After a minute, it opened back up. "Are you sure, Leo? Are you sure you can't eat anything?" the man asked. There was a sadness in his voice that reminded me of the way Al cried in the yard, the last day I spent with him and Maya. "Okay then, come on in, Leo." The dog groaned but couldn't seem to pull his back legs up the last step, so with tender gentleness the man bent and picked up the dog, carrying him inside. I felt myself powerfully drawn to the man and was struck with the sudden thought that this could be a home for me. The man loved his dog, Leo, and would love me. He would feed me, and when I was old and weak, he would carry me back inside his home. Even if I didn't do fine or school or any other work at all, if all I did was devote myself to the man in this house, I would have a place to live. This crazy, purposeless life I had led as bear would be over. I approached the house and did the sensible thing. I ate Leo's dinner. After the weeks of tasteless, gritty dog food at Lisa and Victor's home, the succulent, meaty meal in Leo's bowl was the best thing I'd ever tasted. When it was gone, I licked the metal, and the clang of the bowl against the side of the house alerted the dog inside, who woofed warningly. I heard him approach his side of the door, wheezing, a low growl mounting in volume as Leo became more sure I was there. It didn't sound as if Leo would be very receptive to the idea of me living in his house. I bolted off the steps so that by the time the light flicked on to illuminate the yard, I was already back in the trees. The message in Leo's hostile growl was clear. I would have to find my own home. And that was okay. With my hunger better, my longing to live here had gone away. I slept in some tall grasses, tired, much more content, and my stomach full. I was hungry again by the time I found town, but I knew it was the right place. The approach fooled me. I passed so many houses, their streets bustling with cars and children, where my memory told me there should have only been fields. But then I came upon the place where Grandpa used to sit with his friends and spit violet juices out of his mouth, and it smelled the same, though there were sheets of old wood over the windows and the building next to it was gone, replaced by a raw, muddy hole. At the bottom of the hole was a machine that pushed great piles of dirt in front of it as it moved. Humans can do that, take down old buildings and put up new ones, the way Grandpa built a new barn. They alter their environment to suit themselves, and all dogs can do is accompany them and, if they're lucky, go for car rides. The volume of noise and all the new smells told me that humans here had been very busy changing their town. Several people stared at me as I trotted down the street, and each time I felt like a bad dog. I had no real purpose. Now that I was here, a bag of trash had fallen out of a big metal bin, and it was with a huge sense of guilt that I tore the bag open and pulled out a piece of meat covered in a sticky sweet sauce of some kind. Rather than eat the meal right there, I ran behind the metal bin, hiding from people just as my first mother had taught me. My wanderings eventually brought me to the dog park. I sat at the edge, under some trees, and watched enviously as people threw soaring discs for their dogs to catch in the air. I felt naked without a collar and realized I should hang back, but the way the dogs were wrestling in the middle of the big yard drew me like a magnet. Before I could stop myself, I was out there with them, rolling and running and forgetting myself in the sheer joy of being a dog at play. Some dogs didn't come out to wrestle. They stayed with their people or sniffed along the perimeter of the park, pretending that they didn't care how much fun we were having. Some dogs were drawn to tossed balls or flying discs, and all of them eventually were called away by their people and given car rides, all except me. But none of the people seemed to notice or care that I didn't have anyone there with me. Toward the end of the day, a woman brought a big female yellow dog to the park and let her off her leash. By this time, I was exhausted from all the play and was just lying in the yard, panting, watching two other dogs wrestle. The yellow dog excitedly joined them, interrupting the play for sniffing and tail wagging. I lurched to my feet and went to greet this new arrival and was shocked by what I smelled along her fur. It was Hannah, the girl. The yellow dog grew impatient with my feverish examination of her scent and spun away, eager to play. But I ignored her inviting bow. I excitedly dashed across the park to the dog's owner. The woman on the bench was not Hannah, though. She, too, carried Hannah's smell. "Hello, doggie, how are you?" she greeted me as I approached, my tail wagging. The way she sat reminded me of Maya, shortly before Gabriella, the baby, arrived. There was a sense of tiredness, excitement, impatience, and discomfort, all mixed together and focused on the belly just below her hands. I thrust my nose at her, drinking in Hannah's scent, separating it from the woman, from the happy yellow dog, from the dozens of odors that clung to a person and were a jumble to a dog not trained to find. This woman who had spent time with the girl very recently, this was a woman who had spent time with the girl very recently. I was sure of it. The yellow dog came over, friendly but a bit jealous, and I finally allowed myself to be drawn into a tussle. That night, I folded my black body into the shadows, watching alertly as the last cars pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the dog park in silence. My stealth came to me so easily it was as if I'd never been taken from the culvert, as if I were still there with sister and fast and hungry, learning from our first mother. Hunting was easy. Trash cans were brimming with containers full of delicious scraps, and I avoided headlights and pedestrians with equal caution, hidden, dark, feral once more. But there was a purpose to my life now, a sense of direction even more powerful than the one that had brought me to town in the first place. If, despite all the time and changes, the girl Hannah was here, then maybe the boy was too. And if Ethan was still here, I would track him. I would find Ethan.